I never thought it was cheating. Until the moment I kissed her in that dark, empty parking lot. Then drove home and lay down in bed right next to my wife who was sound asleep. In that exact moment, I knew I had destroyed something that could never be fixed. My name is Tyler, and this is the true story of how I betrayed my wife. While at the beginning I didn't even consider it cheating. Welcome to HLOARA. If you're ready to hear a story that will stay with you long after it ends, stay with me until the very end. This is a mature true story about emotional turmoil, adultery, and bad marriage decisions. Themes of relationship betrayal and infidelity are present. This video is only meant for adults who are at least 18 years old. It is highly recommended that viewers exercise caution. At first I didn't and oppose. Consider it to be cheating. When I go over everything again in my mind, that and oppose. The part that still bothers me. I would have told you without hesitation that I wasn't and oppose. Doing anything wrong if you had really pressed me about it back then. Not in the conventional sense, not in a technical sense. I continued to go home every night, sleep in my wife and oppose. Bed, go to work, pay bills and text her during the day as if nothing had changed. And that and oppose. Precisely what made it so risky. Because it didn't and oppose. Feel like a clean break at all. I didn't and oppose. Crossed the border all at once. I entered in so slowly that I couldn't and oppose. Even tell you when it began by the time I understood where I was. Tyler is my name. I work in commercial real estate, am 54, and reside in a suburb outside of Denver. Ashley, my wife, is 52. We have no children and have been married for 5 years. We simply kept saying maybe next year. Not because we didn't and oppose. Want them until all of a sudden it had been 5 years. We were solid from the outside, the kind of marriage that people believe is steady without giving it much thought. We had nice vacations, hosted people a few times a year, didn't and oppose. Quarrel in public and shared the rare happy photo like everyone else. However, there was silence within the house. It was quiet, but it seemed heavier each month. It wasn't an oppose. Nasty or explosive. We stopped genuinely questioning one another. Discussions became logistics. Have you settled that bill? What would you want to eat for supper? I and oppose. Arrive home late. Stuff that keeps life flowing but doesn't and oppose. Genuinely link you to the person you and oppose. Reliving with. The strange thing is that it wasn't an oppose. Brought on by a significant incident. It simply faded with no huge fight or betrayal. One evening, perhaps 6 months prior to everything going awry, we were sitting on the couch with our phones and the TV on, but neither of us was watching it. And I suddenly had this idea. How long would it take her to notice if I got up and left right now? I should have been afraid of the thought. Rather, it remained motionless. When I first met her, I was in that kind of space. Sophia was her name. It took place at a bar I didn't and oppose. Typically frequent, one of those downtown establishments with dim lighting, exposed brick and pricey cocktails. The kind of place you find yourself at when a coworker demands a single drink after work and you and oppose. Not quite ready to head home. Matt from my office was the one who dragged me out that evening. He wanted to celebrate closing a transaction. I nearly declined. I ought to have declined. However, I went. I saw her seated a few seats down from us as we stood at the bar, halfway through our second drink. I probably saw her because she wasn't an oppose. Attempting to attract attention. She was sitting there, stirring her drink as if she were in her own universe, with neither a loud chuckle nor any overt cues. That caught my attention for some reason. At first, I remained silent. It just dawned on me. I wasn't an oppose. Paying much attention while Matt was discussing work and a client. My attention kept straying. After a while she looked over. Her eyes met for a moment longer than they should have, and then she turned away. It was a brief glance, nothing dramatic. It should have ended there, but it didn't and oppose. After a few minutes, Matt started talking to someone he knew. And all of a sudden I was standing there, half turned in her direction without really intending to be. She glanced over once more. I didn't and oppose. Turn away this time. Is this place always so packed? Just loud enough to be heard over the commotion, she asked. I gave a small smile. To be honest, I don't and oppose. No. I and oppose. We've never been here before. The same. She uttered those words. That was all. The opening was that. We began conversing in the manner of strangers. Easy, light, and uncomplicated. What is your hometown? What are you doing? How are you familiar with this location? Ordinary things. Secure items. She informed me that she was an interior designer. Just relocated to the region. Didn't and oppose. Yet know a lot of people. I discussed real estate with her. Kept it ambiguous. Nothing too profound. She laughed at something I said at one point. Sincerely, not in an artificial manner. And I sensed it. The tiny, nearly forgotten sensation that someone genuinely enjoys conversing with you. And it struck me more forcefully than it ought to have. Since I became aware that I hadn't and oppose, experienced that in a very long time. Not with Ashley. There was a brief moment of guilt, but it was short-lived. I was overanalyzing things, I told myself. It was merely a discussion. People converse. It and oppose. Not dishonest. In the end, Matt was totally forgotten as we sat at the bar together. One drink became 2, then 3. Without any of us really pushing it, the conversation turned from light-hearted banter to something more intimate. She described her previous relationship to me. How it concluded. She felt as though she had squandered years with a person who had broken up with her. I can still clearly recall that exact phrase. Cease to see her. I couldn't and oppose. Shake the uncomfortable familiarity of it. I nodded as if I understood, but I didn't and oppose. Say it aloud. Since I did. Staring into her glass, she remarked and quote, there are times when I think it and oppose. Worse than being alone. End quote. Yes, I muttered. I understand that. It was the first time she truly looked at me when she gazed up at me. Do you? And this is the crucial moment. Something changed at this point. Since I had a decision, I could have preserved the appropriate boundary, made it ambiguous, and kept it at a surface level. However, I didn't and oppose. I said, end quote, I and oppose am married. End quote. There was a small shift in her expression. Nor surprised, nor even let down. Only processing. She said, end quote. Oh. End quote. Yes, I said, almost as if I had to defend it. It and oppose difficult. It was there. When people don and oppose, want to speak the truth, they use that word as a cover. Complicated. She didn't and oppose. Retreat or end the discussion. She leaned in a little, if at all. How is it complicated? She inquired. And I ought to have quit there. I ought to have paid my bill, located Matt, returned home, sat with my wife on that couch, and fixed whatever was wrong with my real life. However, I chose to stay. And I responded. I said, end quote, it feels more like we and oppose. Roommates than anything else. End quote, we don and oppose, quarrel. Simply put, we no longer truly connect. It was weird to say it out. As though I was revealing something I hadn't and oppose. Yet completely acknowledged to myself. Sophia gave a slow nod. Before it concluded, she stated, end quote, that and oppose. Exactly how it was for me. End quote. Something about that, about someone else comprehending without requiring a thorough explanation, drew me in. It didn't and oppose. Feel like going too far. It was a sense of understanding. And that and oppose. How it begins. Not with a huge spectacular betrayal. It and oppose. Just two people at a bar talking to each other about things they probably shouldn't and oppose. Because it seemed simpler than fixing the real problem. We had swapped numbers by the time I departed that evening. It was innocuous, I told myself. Just someone to converse with. Just a link. Nothing more. Before heading home, I recall sitting in my car and gazing at my phone, which had her number saved under her name, Sophia. I ought to have removed it immediately. I didn't and oppose. Rather, I drove home, entered the house, and discovered Ashley precisely where I had anticipated. TV on, phone in hand on the couch. She looked up. You and oppose? Rerunning late, huh? Yes, I replied. Work-related. She gave a nod as if that was sufficient. That was all. No inquiries. No interest. No stress. Just acceptance. When she woke up a bit later, I went upstairs, changed, cleaned my teeth, and climbed into bed with her. In the dark, we laid there. Not making contact. Not speaking. And I became really aware of the distance for the first time. I have anything to compare it to now. I considered texting Sophia that evening, but I didn't and oppose. Her name was the first thing that sprang to mind when I woke up before Ashley the following morning and reached for my phone. I should have known this was not innocuous, whatever it turned out to be. I didn't and oppose. T immediately text her. I can and oppose. T even begin to count the number of times I and oppose. V debated that. Perhaps if I had simply let the moment pass and left it alone for a day or two, it would have died off on its own, as most things do. It did not, however, fade. It became louder, if anything. I followed my morning routine without thinking. Coffee, checking emails, taking a shower, and half listening to Ashley discuss a situation at work. However, there was this ongoing awareness lurking just beneath the surface of everything. I had her name on my phone. Sophia. When you speak it aloud, it sounds foolish. As if it shouldn't and oppose T really matter. It and oppose S merely a contact. Only someone I and oppose V met once. However, it didn't and oppose T seem fair. It didn't and oppose T feel complete. It seemed as if something had begun and stopped in the middle of a sentence. I had opened our text thread 3 times without typing anything by the time I arrived at the office. I was just staring at the blank area, as if I was waiting for the perfect words to come to me. It didn't and oppose T. I closed it as a result. I told myself to concentrate on my task. Maybe an hour passed while that. My phone buzzed when I was halfway through going over a contract at my desk, and I was aware. I didn't and oppose T even have to glance at the screen. Nevertheless, I picked it up. She was the one. Hello. I realize this may sound strange, but I truly enjoyed our conversation last night. I looked at the message for longer than I should have. It wasn't an oppose T hostile. It wasn't an oppose T going over any clear boundaries. It was, if anything, typical. And that and oppose S what made it risky, because it allowed me to reply without feeling guilty about what I was doing. Before I could think about it too much, I typed it back. Not strange. I also did. Almost immediately, 3 dots emerged. Are we acting as though that didn't and oppose T occur? Or I reclined in my chair and let out a slow breath. I was surprised by how straightforward that question was. Once more I had an option. That and oppose S where I could have ended it. Kept everything tidy. I don and oppose T think I want to pretend I typed instead. I sensed a change the moment I submitted it. Not guilt. Not quite yet. Only momentum. It started to happen every day after that. It was light at first. Informal check-ins. A morning message. Something in the afternoon. A couple of texts at night. Nothing that, should someone notice it, would cause concern. However, the tone shifted more quickly than I had anticipated. We quickly moved past things that were only surface level. Before long, we were discussing topics that felt intimate. She went into greater detail about her previous connections with me. I had a particular opinion of her because of the way she portrayed things, as though she had given everything and received less each time. Someone who has been forgotten, undervalued. And I began entering that area without even recognizing it. The listener. The person who receives it. I probably shouldn't and oppose T have let her ask further questions about my marriage. I was evasive at first. It and oppose S simply been far away lately. It and oppose S been a stressful job. We and oppose re-attempting to solve the problem. She didn't and oppose T let things remain ambiguous though. One evening she inquired and quote, what does distant actually look like? And quote, when I received that SMS, I was sitting outside the house in my car. Turn off the engine. Simply gazing at my phone while sitting in the dark. I ought to have entered. Rather I stayed. I typed and quote, it looks like living with someone and not really knowing how they feel anymore. End quote. She said and quote, do you still love her? End quote. That one struck more forcefully. I gazed at it for a while. Because the solution wasn't an oppose T straightforward. And I believe that and oppose S when things began to deteriorate even more. I wrote and quote, I don and oppose T no. End quote. The first genuine crack was that. Something like that becomes true in a way it wasn't an oppose T until you speak it aloud or type it. She didn't and oppose T back down from it either. Yes, she said. Usually that and oppose S where it begins. Where it begins, not where it finishes. I understood her meaning. I didn't and oppose T stop it either. The amount of texting increased after that. More often. More intimate. more consistent. She would send me an SMS as soon as she woke up. Greetings for the morning. I hope that today is better than yesterday. And before I even got out of bed, I would reply. I began to anticipate it. I should have been afraid about that portion. Not the communications and oppos, content. Reliance on them. I noticed that I was checking my phone more frequently, grinning at her remarks, considering how to reply in a way that would continue the discussion. It wasn't an oppos tangible. However, it was something that was not appropriate for a married couple. Before I knew it, Ashley had noticed. First, it was tiny. One evening during dinner, she remarked, and quote, "You and oppos, we been on your phone a lot lately." End quote. I quickly responded, and quote, "Work stuff." End quote. She nodded, but it was obvious she wasn't and oppos. Quite convinced. She continued, and quote, "You seem distracted." End quote. I answered, and quote, "I just have a lot going on right now." End quote. Not a falsehood. Not the truth she was seeking, though. She didn't and oppos. Pressed the issue. Ashley had a thing for that. She refrained from pushing. And I put that to use. Sophia asked if I wanted to get together again a few days later. End quote. "Just coffee," end quote, she said. Public area. There and oppos no pressure. I understood exactly what that meant. It was more than coffee. It was an extension. An advancement. I spent a lot of time sitting with that message. Long enough to understand that accepting would alter the situation. And still. "Yes," I said, end quote, "I and oppos like that." End quote. It was a Saturday afternoon when we first met. I informed Ashley that I needed to spend some time at the office. She hardly questioned it. End quote, "All right," end quote, she said. Don and oppos. Put in too much effort. At that time, I recall sensing a flicker of something. Not guilt. Something worse. Relief. Since it was simple. Too simple. The coffee shop was packed and noisy enough to make people feel unidentified. Sophia was seated at a corner table when I entered, and she gave me a familiar smile, as if we had already done this 100 times. End quote. "Hey," end quote, she said. "Hello." We didn't end oppos. Talk for a moment after I took a seat across from her. Just that silent epiphany. After that, it continued exactly where it had left off. There is no awkwardness. Without hesitation. We spent nearly 2 hours conversing. About everything. About nothing at all. About topics I hadn't in oppos. Discussed with Ashley in a long time. My stories made her laugh. Asked inquiries. Paid attention in a way that seemed deliberate. Sitting there, I came to a realization. I had nothing to hold back. Not at all. I had stopped giving myself at home, but now I was giving it to her. It ceased to be harmless at that point. Not due to anything tangible. Due to the direction my focus was going. Where I was directing my energy. There was this moment when we eventually got up to go. That pause. The type in which something either occurs or does not. She took a small step in closer. She said, end quote, "Thank you for meeting me." End quote. Yes, I answered. I and oppos. Am happy that we did. She then gave me a hug. It wasn't an oppos very long. It wasn't an oppos improper. However, it persisted long enough to have significance. She glanced up at me for a moment longer than was necessary as she withdrew. She said, end quote, "Text me when you get home." End quote. I gave a nod. Yes, I will. And I did. As soon as I got into my vehicle, I sent it back. End quote. He didn't end oppos. Waste any time, end quote, she answered. I promised to do so. Pause occurred. That and oppos. That's what I like about you then. I thought about that line for longer than I should have. Since it had nothing to do with the text. It had to do with what it suggested. Dependability. Pay attention. Existence. It wasn't an oppos. Until someone else pointed them out without explicitly stating it that I realized they were missing. Ashley was in the kitchen when I arrived home. End quote. Hey, end quote, she said. You returned earlier than I anticipated. Yes, I said, putting down my keys. It took less time than I anticipated. She grinned. That and oppos, excellent. She came over, kissed me briefly, and resumed her work. And everything seemed normal for a moment. Cozy. Well known. However, there was now something else beneath that. something I had never brought into this house. Attraction and excitement are not the only factors. It has to do with momentum. It begins to feel like a second life that runs parallel to your real one. Once you establish a routine with someone through daily texts, inside jokes, and shared frustrations. And I persuaded myself that I could handle both for a while. I was mistaken. Calls replaced the texts. Not long at first. 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there. Usually when I was taking a quick call from work, driving, or going outside to get something. Compared to over text, Sophia and Apo's voice sounded different. More immediate and warmer. It drew me in more quickly. She once said, and quote, "Tell me something real," and quote, without warning. I was sitting with my car and Apo's engine running outside a grocery store, gazing blankly. "What does that signify?" I inquired. She said, and quote, "It means stop giving me the edited version of your life. And quote, tell me how you truly feel at home." I slowly let out a breath and rested my head against the seat. "Are you genuinely curious?" I inquired. If I hadn't Apo's I wouldn't Apo's have asked. Pause occurred. I had too many answers, not because I didn't Apo's have any. Finally I said, and quote, "It feels quiet but not in a peaceful way," and quote, "It and Apo's more like we and Apo's." Regis filling in the gaps after everything significant has already been said. She refrained from interjecting. Didn't and Apo's attempt to fix it. Is she aware of it? I said, and quote, "I don't and Apo's think she wants to." And quote, "And you?" It was a heavier question. I said, and quote, "I don't and Apo's think I realized how awful it was until recently." End quote. She reiterated recently. I didn't and Apo's respond to that section. I was not required to. Both of us understood what recently meant. The conversation then began to veer into something more deliberate. Emotional dependence, not merely sharing. I wanted to let her know first if something positive occurred. I vented to her when I was frustrated. I felt obligated to cheer her up if she had a bad day. And that and Apo's where the real change took place. I started showing up for her in ways that I wasn't in Apo's showing up at home because I stopped just talking to her. As time passed, Ashley noticed more. One evening as I was half-dressed and preparing to leave, she stood in the doorway and remarked, and quote, "You and Apo's we been working late a lot." And quote, I said, not glancing at her, and quote, "Yeah, we and Apo's we got a few deals closing." And quote, "You also mentioned that last week. The deals are the same." She didn't and Apo's answer immediately. "Would you like me to stop by the office at some point? Bring you a meal or something?" I was unprepared for that. "No," I spoke too hastily. "That is not necessary for you to do." She looked at me for a moment. She said, and quote, "I and Apo's am just trying to spend time with you." And quote, "I know," I responded more gently. "I simply have a lot on my plate at the moment." Once more there it was. That justification. Work. Secure. Without a doubt. It is simple to hide behind. She gave a slow nod. All right. She refrained from pushing. I used that once more. I was not going to the office that evening. Sophia and I were meeting. This time not for coffee. Dinner. We chose a location that was roughly 20 minutes away from where I usually hang out. Far enough away that I wouldn't Apo's encounter any familiar faces. I should have learned everything from that one detail alone. This was no longer informal. This was deliberate. She was already there when I entered the restaurant, sitting in a booth and looking through her phone. When I walked up to her, she looked up and her face lit up in a way that seemed intimate. End quote. "Hey," end quote, she said. "Hello." I moved to the seat across from her. And that same moment reappeared. Before anything even happens, there is that moment when everything feels charged. She said, end quote, "You made it." End quote. "Yes. It appears that you nearly didn't an Apo's tea." I smiled a little. "There has been a lot of work." She studied me with a slight tilt of her head. She said, end quote, "You can stop saying that." End quote. "What?" "That work is at the center of everything." I let out a breath and leaned back a little. I acknowledged it was an old habit. "Yes," she replied. I reasoned. Dinner began fairly normally. Food, beverages, and conversation all flowed smoothly. However, something was developing beneath it. Something very present but unsaid. During dinner, There was a moment when her hand touched mine across the table. Neither of us attempted to ignore the weight of the touch as it lingered. I sensed it right away. That contact. That link. I also didn't in Oppo's tea retreat. That was the time. Not the writings. Not the phone calls. That. Because you are no longer pretending once you accept and permit such contact. With her fingers still pressed against mine, she whispered, end quote, you and Oppo's, rethinking too much. End quote, I said, end quote, I do that. End quote, I am aware. Her hand remained still. I didn't and Oppo's either. For the remainder of the night, everything seemed both sharper and softer at the same time, creating an odd heightened blur. Each glance lasts longer. Feels like every word has weight. It was cool outside when we left the restaurant. Silent. The parking lot is largely deserted. We were standing close to our vehicles. We and Oppo's, neither in a rush to get out. She said, end quote, this is the part where you overthink again. End quote, I exhaled quietly. Most likely. She said, end quote, you Don and Oppo's tea have to. End quote, I sort of do. Why? I gave her a look. Took a close look at her. For a brief moment, everything seemed both extremely simple and extremely complex. I said, end quote, because this ISN and Oppo's tea simple. End quote, no, she concurred. It and Oppo's not. A pause. Then she moved in closer. Not hurried. Not reluctant. Just certain. End quote, you can leave now if you and Oppo's like, end quote, she said. It wasn't an Oppo's tea difficult. It was a way out. An actual one. And I was aware of it. I could have retreated a step. Entered my vehicle. Left for home. I put an end to it before it got out of control. Rather, I remained exactly where I was. I said, end quote, I know. End quote. She looked at my face for a moment as if to confirm. She leaned in and we kissed in that silent parking lot. It was slow and contained everything we had in Oppo's tea spoken aloud. I realized then that we had gone too far and there was no turning back. I did not retreat. There will be no more gray areas. It and Oppo's just talking now. Pretending is over. The atmosphere changed as we withdrew. Something last. Something that cannot be denied. Neither of us said anything at first. We were not required to. Silently she said, end quote, text me when you get home. End quote. I gave a nod. Yes, I will. I entered my vehicle, shut the door, and simply took a moment to sit there, grasping the steering wheel. My heart is still pounding. I was fully aware of what I had just done. There was no longer any confusion. There is no space for interpretation. Silently I drove home. Not a single song. There are no interruptions. Just my thoughts catching up with me in real time. The house was just as it always was when I pulled into the driveway. The lights are on. The curtains are drawn. Nothing is out of place. But as I entered it, I felt different. Like I didn't in Oppo's tea belong in it the same way anymore. Once more, Ashley was sitting on the couch. Same posture. The same pattern. She looked up when I came in. End quote. Hey, end quote, she said. How did the work go? I hesitated for 30 seconds. I said, end quote. Long, end quote. As usual, she accepted it with a nod. Dinner and Oppo's in the fridge if you and Oppo's hungry. I ate already, I replied. Oh, all right. She went back to her phone. That was all. No suspicion. No inquiries. Just trust. The kind of trust one had just broken. I went upstairs, shut the bedroom door, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands. Even as I drove home, the weight of what had just happened sat heavy in my chest. I could still feel the closeness, the connection we had shared. When I finally texted her I'm home, I already knew this wasn't something I could easily walk away from. Her name was already at the top of my messages. I typed, end quote, I and Oppo's home. End quote. Almost immediately, 3 dots emerged. I agree. A pause. Next. Are you all right? I gazed at that query. I ought to have declined, since I wasn't in Oppo's tea. However, I typed instead. Yes. One more pause. Do you feel bad about it? She inquired. I surveyed the space. On the bed. The dresser. This was the life I had created. The parking lot came to mind after that. The sensation. The way she gazed at me. And I gave an honest response. No. That and Oppos. Same bed. Same residence. The same pattern. On the inside, though, everything had changed. I grabbed my phone. Sophia had sent a text already. I can and Oppos. T stopped thinking about last night. I felt the same tug in my chest as I gazed at the message. I said, end quote. Me too, end quote, 3 dots. Visit me tonight. Without hesitation. There is no soft lead-in. Simply put. I ran a hand through my hair and sat up a little. I typed, end quote, I and Oppos. Am not sure if I can tonight. End quote. It wasn't an Oppos. T even entirely accurate. Slowing things down was just instinct. To give the impression that I was still in charge of the speed. Her answer struck a different chord because it made me face my own truths in a way I had been avoiding. Yes, I wanted to. That was the issue. I said, end quote, I want to. End quote. Then she replied, end quote, figure it out. End quote. The decision was made in an instant. Not in a dramatic, sentimental manner. Simply put, I was half puzzled for the remainder of the day. Calls, emails, and meetings. It all seemed to be background noise. My focus kept returning to my phone, to her, to my intended course of action. Ashley was in the kitchen when I arrived home that night. End quote. Hey, end quote, she said with a small smile. We could place our order tonight, I thought. Watch something, perhaps? Her tone had a hint of optimism. That little effort. And I felt it for a moment. That return to what I ought to be doing. I said, end quote, actually I have to head back out. End quote. There was a slight shift in her expression. Once more? Yes. Client had an issue. I won an Oppos. T stayed too long. That was no longer even remotely credible. She was aware of it. The way she gazed at me told me. Not aggressive. Not upset. Just conscious. Quieter now, Tyler, she said. With my hand on my keys, I hesitated. Yes. She paused. As if she was debating whether or not to express her true thoughts. Is everything all right? It was there. Not a charge. A gap. An opportunity to pause. To be honest. Or at least a portion of it. I could have replied, end quote. No, end quote. There and Oppos is a problem. We must speak. I could have stayed. Rather, I gave her a direct look and replied, end quote. Yeah. End quote. It and Oppos is all good. At that point, I deliberately decided to continue lying. She looked at me for a moment longer, as if she was trying to find something. She then gave a nod. All right. That was all. Not a fight. Not a scene. Just that silent acceptance once more. I then left through the door. Compared to the previous evening, the drive to Sophia and Oppos' place felt different. Tension is reduced. Less reluctance. Greater anticipation. She remained silent as soon as she opened the door. Simply gave me a look. Then moved aside so I could enter. Her apartment lived up to my expectations. Tidy and deliberate. Everything has its proper place. Warm lighting. There and Oppos' background music playing softly. She said, end quote, you made it. End quote, I promised to do so. She gave a small smile. You did. This time there was no small talk. There and Oppos' no easing into it. Everything we had been suppressing for weeks finally surfaced as soon as the door closed behind us. We both knew there was a line and we crossed it. I won and Oppos' act like I made a lot of effort to stop it. Even though I knew exactly what it was costing me and what it meant for my marriage, I made the decision to feel something in that apartment for those hours that I hadn't in Oppos' felt in my marriage in a long time. I didn't and Oppos' really notice for hours. In that place, time seemed unimportant. As if the outside world had been suspended. She put her head lightly on my shoulder and said, end quote, you and Oppos' different here. End quote, how? End quote, more present, end quote, she answered. It and Oppos' as if you and Oppos' here in real life rather than just in your imagination. I exhaled quietly. Perhaps because I am. She looked up at me with a slight tilt of her head. So why Don and Oppos'? Do you just stay where you are? The question lingered in the atmosphere. On the surface it seemed straightforward. Complex underneath. I said, end quote, because it and Oppos' not that easy. End quote, she answered, end quote, there and Oppos' that word again. End quote. Simple. It and oppose s not simple. It has to do with everything else that is connected to it. She said, end quote, your marriage. End quote, I gave a nod. For a moment she was silent. Would you like to fix it? She inquired. That question struck me harder than I had anticipated. I hadn't and oppose. T forced myself to say it aloud yet, not because I didn't and oppose. T have an answer. I didn't and oppose. T look at her, instead I looked forward. I said, end quote, I don't and oppose. T know if there and oppose. S anything left to fix. End quote. It felt heavier to say that than anything I had ever said. Because it wasn't an oppose. T just distance or frustration anymore. It was final. She didn't and oppose. T answer immediately. She didn't and oppose. T looked surprised when I finally turned to face her. It was certain, if anything. Then she said, what are you clinging to? I didn't and oppose. T have a clear response to that. Guilt, fear, history and habit. Everything blended together. I said, end quote, I don't and oppose. T no. End quote, she gave a slow nod as if she had anticipated that. She said, end quote, you will. End quote. It was later than I should have left her place. Much later. The house was dark when I arrived. Ashley was asleep. I entered quietly, as if that somehow made it less noticeable. As if my actions could be concealed by silence. I went upstairs, changed and cautiously got to my butt. Beside me she stirred a little. She muttered, half asleep, end quote, Tyler. End quote. Yes, I muttered. What time is it? Late. Return to your sleep. She moved, reclining. All right, she murmured. That was all. No inquiries, no conflict. Just have faith. Once more. I lay there wide awake, gazing into the darkness. And I felt it for the first time since this began. Just enough to notice it, not enough to stop. The burden of my actions. Because it was no longer only about me. Feeling seen, understood, and alive again wasn't and oppose. T the only thing. It had to do with the fact that I was actively lying to one person while creating something genuine with another. And those two things couldn't and oppose. T coexist indefinitely without colliding. I was aware of that. I simply had no idea when it would happen or how terrible it would be. However, I believe I also understood something else in my heart. I wasn't an oppose. T trapped in this circumstance. I was picking one. Every time I left that door, every text, every lie. And decisions like that are not always concealed. They overtake you. The only question is when. When they do more than simply transform your life. They alter the way others perceive you. Forever.